take the opportunity to welcome Dr. Ajay Mathur and Professor G. Shankar on the dais for the keynote address. Dr. Mathur, President GRIHA Council and Director General TERI, is a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change. He was Director General of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in the Government of India from 2006 till February 2016 and responsible for bringing energy efficiency into our homes, offices, and factories through initiatives such as the Star Labeling Program for appliances, the Energy Conservation Building Code, and the Perform, Achieve, and Trade Program for the energy-intensive industries. He is often called as the rock star of energy efficiency. I would request Dr. Mathur to introduce the esteemed keynote speaker, Professor G. Shankar.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very proud privilege to welcome and introduce Professor Shankar. Professor Shankar, as we all know, appreciate, is the pioneer of the people's housing movement in the country. And not only housing, but a housing which is cost-effective, which is sustainable, and which uses building technologies that are both, on the one hand, effective and user-friendly and sustainable on the other side. Professor Shankar studied architecture from the College of Engineering Trivandrum and then did a master's from the Birmingham School of Architecture and a postgraduate degree in journalism as well, which probably explains why you're also such an effective communicator. His concept of green architecture has brought around a multi-faceted change, and I would suggest a much required change in the shelter sector, at least in Kerala, and now spreading to other parts of the country. He is the founder and chief architect of Habitat Technology Group, which is working in the shelter sector in South Asia and responding to needs in India and other developing countries, Bangladesh, Nigeria. I may be missing other countries, but there's a large number of developing countries where his solutions have gone to. Professor Shankar was awarded the Padma Shri in 2011, and it is an honor for us that he's here with us to share his thoughts. Professor Shankar.
The president of this function, and my dear friends, I don't know whether you heard of the famous English poet Kamala Das. Kamala Das was probably the most famous English poet, written both in English and in my native language, Malayalam. When I was doing architecture from College of Engineering Trivandrum, I was a voracious reader at that time, and I used to get fascinated with the writings of Kamala Das as an English poet. And one day, I had the gumption, courage to take a train to Kolkata now, to meet two persons. Both these persons actually transformed my life. People of my age would remember that. Mother Teresa was working in the slums of Calcutta at that time. And there was a scathing criticism that came in Indian press about the so-called nefarious activities she was indulged in. as a person with a deep interest in investigative journalism. I was a student architect at that time. I took a train to know what it was all about. And to my surprise, I found a real saint. The first time I was actually coming face to face with a saint. I had great difficulty in meeting him because, I was denied entry at the Sisters of Charity home, and finally, I stood at a corridor where she used to take an evening stroll, and I saw with my own eyes the passion and the compassion with which she was working, touching people. It's extremely important, touching people and transforming their lives. That probably was a defining moment in my own life. Probably that was when I thought I should take a different route, a less traveled route. And that obviously has led me to amazing vistas. The next person I wanted to meet was Kamala Das. Kamala Das was living in Calcutta at that time. She spent a lot of time there. And she was virtually mobbed. From morning to evening, she was surrounded with fans, writers, intellectuals, and the rest of them. Somehow I managed a shake hand with her because I wanted to touch her. She was so dear. Her writings were so dear. And later, much later, she came to stay in a rented place near where I was staying in Trivandrum. In Kerala, she was an unknown entity. Nobody knew about her value as a writer. Nobody could recognize on the road. And I was wondering, how would she take the loneliness? Later, she moved to Pune, where she spent her very last days. And from Pune, she wrote that the empty post box and the silent telephone actually taught her many things. When I came into this auditorium, I was looking at almost an empty auditorium. Now there are a few people there. But I should tell you that she wrote, it taught me what humility is all about. So that makes me state that I'm really humbled. I'm a happy person today. I've taken this long journey, started this long journey probably 3 decades back, when there were no takers for what we used to call as cost-efficient, eco-sensitive, and energy-efficient architecture. We have literally sustained, the youngsters in this crowd should listen to this. We have literally sustained this movement by shedding our own blood. Blood? Yes. We have been always fighting against the people who were bent on selling your helplessness and ignorance. The building industry, for your information, survives on the ignorance and helplessness of the people across. When we are fighting that, we are fighting against people with money, we are fighting with people with power. My own leg and my own hand were brutally mauled. I wouldn't say broken, mauled is the word. And when I talk about, when I hear that slogans like sustainably is affordable, it really lightens up my heart. Now there are takers. Sustainability, we have been telling people, we are telling the nation, we have been telling the world like a prayer that sustainability in the building sector, in the shelter sector especially, will come into a mandatory requirement. That's what's happening today. And all the arguments against incorporating sustainability into our main vocabulary are now being quashed. One of the greatest concerns about sustainability, one of the arguments against sustainability was, it's always costly in the beginning, probably operational costs will reduce it further. No. We said no, that is not the reality. That's not the reality. As an architect, right from the day one, when we are talking about sustainability, it meant cost efficiency. CSIR in Trivandrum, they actually brought out a beautiful building material when I was very young, when I was just into the profession. It was a lightweight brick. Inside was all kind of spongy. They used a waste material, coconut pith, into the interiors of this burned brick, burned it, and they got a very beautiful, dimensionally stable. That's what an architect always looks for. Dimensionally stable brick. Very beautiful. You could expose it, you could flaunt it, you could have unplastered, beautiful walls, dimensionally very stable, texture same, color same. So it was very acceptable. But when it came to costing, it's not acceptable because it is costing 3 times more than the conventional burn brick that you would get in the market. The technology didn't take off. Today, we are actually debating about technologies and materials and methodologies that will prove that sustainability is not in the operation of this thing. Right from the day one, right from the day of incorporation, will mean cost efficiency. My dear friends, we have a huge agenda before us. I was fortunate to attend the last 2 habitats that happened at Istanbul and 2016 that happened at Quito, Ecuador. On both these occasions, I was a part of the Indian delegation to habitats. One that happened in 96, second that happened in 2016. The world actually began to debate about issues in the habitat sector from 1976. If you remember right, Vancouver Conference, Habitat 1, that happened in Vancouver in 1976, said the theme of that particular session was housing for all, housing for all. In 2020, we are nearing 2020 in another 2 years, we are still talking about housing for all. In 1996, that was a huge conference where we got our voices heard in the world platforms. That was where we got 2 important terms into the habitat agenda. Which were them? One was sustainability in the light of urbanization, one critical area of intervention. Second thing was about adequate housing. Adequate housing. I should say it with pride and pleasure that it was the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, who actually questioned the very term what adequacy meant. When he was inaugurating the prestigious development sign, Pakranangal, way back in 1950s, he asked a pertinent question to the nation. Are we, architects and engineers of this country, are we mandated to decide about the destiny of the poor people? Are we mandated to discuss about the destiny of the people who are living on the margins, the dispossessed, the marginalized, and the rest of them? He said, we are not mandated. The only role the government can play is to facilitate. Take on the role of a facilitator, a kind of an enabling, bring out enabling strategies that would probably change the destinies of the poorer people in this country. Adequate housing and sustainability became a worldwide discussion point from 1996. 20 years later, in Quito, I should share it with you. I was an extremely sad person. From adequate housing for all in 1976 to sustainable housing and adequate housing in 1996 to housing at the center was the theme of Quito conference. Housing at the center. That means the world has not gone forward in solving the issues. I keep on talking the students of civil engineering and architecture throughout the country why we are together responsible for the climate change of the planet Earth. I'll just reel out some figures which doesn't appear elsewhere. We are probably building 180 million buildings, out of which 153 million buildings, and out of which only 3 million are commercial buildings, institutional buildings. The rest of it is all, 150 million falls in the housing sector, the shelter sector. So that, is a staggering percentage, which means 98% of the construction activities that are happening in this country is happening in the habitat sector. We should read it with the impact of climate change. The flyer that is being circulated to you, the curtain raiser flyer that is being circulated to you, they talk about big time abuse of a lot of resources, air, water, emission of greenhouse gases, and the rest of it. And what do they infer from that? If you go in for sustainable houses, that will mean a paradigm change. It's not a slight change. A paradigm change in the emission of greenhouse gases, in looking at energy consumption, in looking at water usages, and things like that. This on one side. You have to also read it along with urbanization that is happening all over the world. I want you to know about it. I want you to actually internalize the pleasures and promises of urbanization. Pleasures and promises of urbanization. I would say that urbanization cannot be wished away. It's a reality that we have to internalize. How to internalize the potential and promise of urbanization is a thing of contemplation, is a thing that should be debated further. One thing that we will all realize is that pace and intensity of urbanization that is happening across the world is staggering. It's painful for people like me because it's happening mostly in the third world countries. If it happens in the first world countries, probably we wouldn't have taken note of it. We wouldn't have taken note of it. But the strain of urbanization is on the infrastructure facilities, on the destinies of people who are living in the third world. You must have heard of small countries like Paraguay, Uruguay, that appears only once in 4 years when the football matches are on. Paraguay, Uruguay, Guatemala, small little countries in Central America and Latin America. Urbanization is touching a percentage of 95. Believe me, 95. Brazil, Argentina is already crossing 90%. Small East European countries that have just emerged, Macedonia, Herzegovina, Bosnia, Croatia, urbanization is at the peak. It's very sad. It's happening in the most sick countries of the world. Which are them? The sub-Saharan African countries like Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, which you don't see them, but they are there. Urbanization is almost touching 100%. That is a sad thing. But what are the promises? Why do urbanization happen? If you look at the dynamics of urbanization, why do urbanization? Because the urban areas always is a promise in many ways. It gives you livelihood options, it gives you employment potential, it gives you economic potential, it gives you economic opportunities. That is why you flock to urban areas. So this flow from the rural areas to urban areas will continue unabated. Probably in 2050, 2060, 2070, India, I hope, will be completely urbanized. We won't have rural areas in our map. The entire country probably will be completely urbanized. That is on one side. What does urbanization mean? It means a lot of pressure in the shelter sector. I'm not a pessimist for a moment. I see a lot of, for architects and engineers in this crowd, let me tell you this. A lot of opportunities are going to happen in transitional areas, which you don't see now. You talk about urban areas, there are fringe areas. There are these transitional areas between the urban areas and the rural areas where your architecture and engineering solutions are going to appear. And that's going to be huge, huge platform. I want to basically touch on two things. You must have heard a lot of people talk about the rest of the things. I don't want to go into that. Two things that is actually impacting climate change and its relation to shelter sector. I'll just reel out a figure. You should really internalize the pain and anguish when I reel out the figure. I come from the state of Kerala, where we have only 44 rivers. And all the 44 rivers are on a certain deathbed. We have only 44 rivers, and all the 44 rivers are dying. It was such a watery state one time. I still remember when I was a young student, when they started selling this packaged water in bottles. I used to wonder, who would buy that? Who would really buy packaged water in Kerala? It has come to a state where, as the English poet said, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. That's the state in which the state is. I think it's happening across the country, across the world. Recently, I had the huge occasion to see Danube and Euphrates in Europe. I'm seeing them slowly getting dried up. Euphrates, Tigris, these are the rivers in our memory. As a young student of geography, used to really revel about these kind of rivers. Now, the world over, it's a huge scarcity for water. And in India, where we have a staggering population, what are the figures that we should internalize? 5 billion liters a day. My dear friends, 5 billion liters a day is a figure that goes beyond your comprehensions. As an architect with some mathematics background, you can visualize what 100,000 is, what 1,000,000 is. You can visualize that. But when it goes to billions, it goes beyond our comprehensions. 5 billion liters a day is being used in India to flush out our dirt from the toilets. 5 billion liters a day is being used in India to flush out the dirt from the toilets. That is the figure that you should internalize. And during the pre-construction phase and the post-construction phase, my dear friends, in the pre-construction phase and the post-construction phase, the water usage that we are talking about, unless you go into optimal minimum, it's going to be death for you. Let me also bring to your notice, which never gets at gets discussed in these kind of forums about indoor air quality. You tend to believe that you see smoke outside, you feel a lot of dust outside, the cricket match was interrupted in Ferozshah Kotla ground. You have seen all that, and you tend to believe the atmospheric air quality outside is more contaminated than the air quality inside, isn't it? Inside this auditorium. I'm telling you, my dear friends, you can rip me open if I'm wrong, but I'm telling you, the indoor air quality, which is a determinant for the occupant health issues of this particular auditorium, with these kind of carpets and the kind of upholstery you have, is 100 times, that's a staggering percentage, 100 times more polluted than the atmospheric air. Why are we not looking at indoor air quality? These are things that never get discussed. You talk about embedded energy, you talk about the rest of things, but the basic qualities of water, its inherent relation to health and your well-being gets never discussed in this issue. So these are two things, water and the air quality. We should be there if you are talking about a sustainable paradigm of building beautiful shelters. The numbers are staggering. I was actually attending another session where the CEO, the big man, chairman of a big public sector undertaking, was reeling out a figure that was quite unacceptable to social activists like this. In Kerala, I've been single-handedly writing the housing policy of the state for the last 25 years. And I should tell you, one of the key issues that comes right in the front, the lack of data. My dear friends, the indicators, when you take statistics, are not really right, acceptable to people like us. When an enumerator who takes the census comes to your house, and even if you have a sheet above the head, they will actually term you as a housed person. Unless and otherwise, you have access to potable water, unless and otherwise, you have access to clean cooking space and a clean toilet, how can you call that a house? So likewise, the numbers are all mutilated. He was talking about a deficit of 10 million housing units in India in the urban areas. In the flyer that is being circulated to you, they are talking about 33 million, that's a backlog of 33 million housing units in the country as per the projections. There will be 33 million backlog in 2020, if I remember right. If you had been talking about a number exceeding 50 million dwelling units. Unless and otherwise you internalize this figure, you won't be able to go forward because sustainability has to be brought at that particular platform where the poor people actually live. 50 million families. If you take the average household number of 5 people, we are talking about 25 crores. Always we say that 125 crores is the population of India. Out of 25 crores, people who have faces like us, identities like us, they are living in unacceptable living conditions. Unacceptable living conditions without access to potable water, without access to clean toilets, and without access to clean cooking space. Unacceptable. 1 in 5 of our population are living in such conditions. And what is the way out? That's an interesting debate that should actually ensue, especially in the minds of the youngsters in this crowd. There's a brown agenda. Along with the habitat agenda, we have a brown agenda in front of us. We are basically a poor country. Poverty on one side, environment on the next side, and development on the third side. seemingly diverse elements. Is poverty on one side, development on the other side, environment on the same side. The critical question before India as a nation is how to build bridges between poverty and development, and poverty and environment and development. Can we really build bridges? Poverty, I'm just going to leave some open-ended questions to you. Please think about it. Think it over. Can poverty be a positive phenomenon? I will say, it can be a very positive phenomenon because it urges people to dream on, hope on, and live on. Poverty, in many ways, can propel people forward, isn't it? Poverty can really propel people forward. They can take people forward. You want your son to probably get better employment, better education. You want your son to probably work in big-time institutions like Infosys, Wipro, and institutions like that. You want that to happen. Probably poverty can be a big catalyst. How to bridge seemingly diverse phenomenon, that is very critical. We feel that every time environment issues are being called, we are actually kind of throttling development. It's not so. Especially in the sustainability platform, it is not so. You can effectively, let me tell you, effectively bridge all these seemingly diverse elements, poverty, development, and environment. If you can bridge that, then we are slowly building up the sustainability platform. We are slowly building up the sustainability platform. The sustainability platform, as far as buildings are concerned, actually starts with the design part of it. When I say design part of it, everybody is talking about technologies, materials, but I will say, as a practitioner for the last 3 decades, that actually it starts from the moment a client comes to you, sits before you. From that moment, the actual process starts. Architects and engineers should tell the client 2 things, which you don't say. Unfortunately, my fraternity people don't say that. Incremental housing is the only way out. What do you mean by incremental housing? You have to differentiate between your dreams and your actual needs. You can differentiate your needs and the essentials. It was actually my guru, mentor, Laurie Baker, who said, build only the essentials, the rest of it could follow. This is the crux of the concept. The generations that suffered because of bad financial planning is our generation, the present day generations. Our forefathers never ever went bankrupt because of building activities. They had an extremely nice, extremely sound financial proposal in front of them. Build only the core house. In my language, we used to call the Thai Vida, core house. Build only the core house. Later, you build only one room now. When your son or daughter wants next room, you build one like that. That is what is called the concept of a house that grows. House that grows. Incremental housing is a critical intervention. We actually brought it. Government of India brought it. Initial schemes are all about site and services. You give a bit of land and people will build. People are genuinely creative. I was just looking at the boats outside, bills outside, showing some vignettes of rural life. People are so creative. They will build with whatever materials they get. Give them a place to anchor their dreams. Give them a little place to anchor their dreams. That was the initial scheme. Somewhere we started building and lost our ways. Incremental housing is a critical determinant. That should be processed forward, incremental housing. You have to differentiate between your physical needs and your metaphysical needs. Rich people who come to me, I talk about the places where you can contemplate, a place to read books, a place to meditate, a place to listen to music, a place to, sing and things like that. To the people who have choices. But to the people who don't have choices, what do you tell them? How do you create 5 bed spaces within probably an area of 450 square feet is the critical design intervention that the country needs. A few years back, I was in Philippines looking at HIG flats. Before that, a group of slum dwellers, we call them slum dwellers, poor settlements, from Mumbai came to our place looking at examples of sustainable slum development. They said, I can speak Hindi very well, but they said, ye to middle class MIG ka koti hai, something like that. Ye hamara koti nahi hai, ye to MIG ka koti hai, something like that. This is a perception difference that we should tell them very clearly that small is always beautiful. Small is always beautiful. That's what Schumacher said. We should ingrain that. Build small houses. If you can build small houses, the imprint, the footprint of your building on the earth will be much less. As socially committed architects and engineers, can we go for a lesser imprint is something that we should actually debate on. It talks about energy efficiency, it talks about eco-sensitivity, it talks about resource efficiency in a very big way. Let me tell you that. Resource efficiency is a very key word. When you reduce the area footprint, you're actually talking about resource efficiency. Can we go for smaller and more beautiful houses? Smaller and beautiful? Smaller and beautiful is a critical linkage that you should really build up. And go for incremental housing. Tell them that this is possible. After 5 years, when your financial positions probably improve, you can add room. There should be kind of scientific planning. That's the only thing that is required. In an architect's mind, you should design it so well. So the further expansion, future provisions, a place to dream should be left. How do you manage a site? It's a critical issue. The sustainability, actually, that's where you start construction. The people don't see the site before they design, unfortunately. For instance, in Kerala, we have 3 distinct geographical zones. We talk about hills, mountains, we talk about plain lands, and we have a long coastal line measuring around 700 kilometers. 700 kilometer long coastal line, small state, one of the smallest states in India. We have hills, we have plain lands, and our architecture, vernacular idioms of architecture, traditional idioms of architecture always used to respond to this site. It was our forefather, the father of organic architecture, Frank Lloyd Wright, who said, building should belong to this site. It was he who said, building should belong to this site. Building should not be on a mountain. He said, building should be off a mountain. In Kerala, what's happening? Elsewhere, I'm going to be region specific in Kerala because it's the same story that you will share with me. Everywhere, mountains are being flattened out. All the lower levels are being filled up, and we are trying to promote a kind of new style of architecture. As Gautam Bhatia, the architect from Delhi, has once pointed out, he was talking about Punjabi Baroque. He was talking about Tamil Tiffany styles of architecture to diversely different styles of architecture blending together like that. I'm just going to phrase a new word, Maidan architecture. We want to build everything on plain lands. You cannot do that. Site manipulation will bring in ecological disasters, my dear. How to design according to the dictates of the land, according to the contours of the land, is a big challenge. How to look at land as a sensitive entity is a thing that actually we should try to look at. Having said that, having looked at the sustainable basic design part of it, reducing the imprint, looking at the future expansion potential, looking at the site, the orientation, nobody looks at that. When you talk about, let us for a minute, I'll come to technologies and materials later. Let us think about ventilation and proper lighting. We have a very bright sun, my dear friends. We have a very bright, in India we get I go to Sweden, Norway to teach. And I had to wait for long hours to get a bright sun in. We need bright sun, isn't it? We Indians need bright sun. We have bright sun across the country. And still we are putting lights on during this thing. We are making it dark, then putting lights on. And we endlessly debate about energy efficiency and the rest of it. Cross ventilation, as simple as that. And lighting. You should have, every habitable house should have, all the rooms should have at least 2 sides exposed to atmospheric air. 2 sides exposed. 2 sides exposed will bring in lot of light and lot of ventilation. As an architect, it's my life story. If I call wind in, my dear friends, it will come in. It's all about orientation. It's all about your sensitivity. It's all about orientation. It's all about looking at the sun, looking at the vistas, looking at the wind path. In Kerala, we get the westerly winds. If you put kitchen on the western side, the smoke will come in. Traditional idioms of architecture always centered on these kinds of sustainability concerns. We have moved away from that paradigm, and now we are putting the lights on. We are, making this thing closed and talking about energy efficiency and the rest of it. Since the time is limited, let me briefly touch on some of the technologies and materials with which I build all my buildings. I don't think anybody in India have done more buildings than what I have done. All the buildings, 150,000 individual buildings, 150,000 individual buildings, and 500,000 housing units that we have built have always used cost-efficient, eco-sensitive, and energy-efficient architecture, materials. Material vocabulary has been saved. In Bangladesh, I've done the largest earth building in the world. Earth building, 600,000 square feet, purely out of earth. We have built such things. We are scaling it up. We are going to multi-storied buildings. My own office building is a no columns, no beams, 6-storied mud building. The end of it, I'll show you a small little video which will last hardly for 5 minutes, which actually will expose the kind of concerns, what I mean by sustainable architecture. Take it to the extreme limits. Talk about roofs that don't require any steel, completely mud roofs and things like that, away from steel, cement, and the rest of this. It's an extremely logical thing that I'm going to raise, and I'm going to show it to you. And if it raises questions in you, I'll be happy. Why mud and bamboo and things like lime should be promoted as a mainstream building material is a critical thing that you have to ponder on. Why lime? I'm making some statements. I'm just going to make some statements. I say that mud buildings can be as strong as any other conventional building. I'm going to make a statement that why we use steel in reinforced concrete is because of its tensile properties. Tensile properties. Am I running short of time? Yeah. I'll wind up. Why are we using steel? It's because of tensile properties. And bamboo has got almost the same tensile strength. Bamboo, split bamboo, when you reinforce well, it actually attains the strength of steel rods. Structural limitations are there, engineering limitations are there, but it attains the strength of this thing. Lime is as good as cement. Basically, when you look at it, it's the same material packaged in 2 ways. Lime, we have the largest, richest lime deposit in the world, Kerala. One of the lakes have 15 feet of most beautiful buildable lime in the world. We are not mainstream that material. We are not mainstream that material. Now, how do you add technologies to the material to make it more sustainable? Stabilized mud block is a huge answer. You must have seen, I don't know, Chitra was here yesterday. You must have seen some of her buildings. Stabilized mud block is a huge technology intervention. Where we get the compressive strength of brick, the ordinary compressive strength of clay bricks, if it's around 25 kilograms, 30 kilograms per centimeter square, stabilized mud blocks are talking about a compressive strength of more than 45 kilos. It's validated, structurally validated, Very sensible. Why sensible? You don't use the cement masala in between. You save on sand, you save on cement. It's cool. I mean, it's very cooling inside. It's thermally very, very acceptable material. Talks about insulation. These are the timeless parameters of sustainability. When you talk about sustainability, you should talk about cost efficiency, energy efficiency, eco-sensitivity, and all the materials that you should use in the building, sustainable buildings that you're talking about. Unless it touches the timeless parameters, then it will not be taken forward. Finally, I mean, I have to cut down this thing, but finally let me tell you, sensitivity is a thing that should be taken forward. Sensitivity, you should be sensitive. I mean, if you ask me one word, what is the solution that, in Uttarakhand, when the rehabilitation works were going on, then Chief Minister actually called me in front of the international press. I was asked to give a one-word strategy for rehabilitation. I said, Himalayan geology, it's very fragile. It's a holy land. Uttarakhand is a holy land. You have to tread on it carefully. That is the one-liner that I got as a rehabilitation strategy before the international press. They clapped, they accepted me. But this is one thing that I want to tell you. My dear friends, habitat literacy is the only way forward. Tell the people other people who are coming to you, the practitioners of sustainable architecture and engineering, that there are ways out. You have to do it not for you, not looking at resource efficiency. It's for the nation. It's for the nation. The nation needs such passionate and compassionate approaches. If the nation accepts that, then it will be rosy, blooming days for all of us. Thank you for your kind attention. Just before I wind up, I'll just show you a video. Can you just switch on the video for a minute?
പച്ചപ്പിന്റെ കാഴ്ചകളിലേക്കാണ് ആ ഗേറ്റ് തുറന്നത്.
Don't have the sound.
140-ലധികം മരങ്ങൾ തണൽ വിരിക്കുന്നു.
It's in my local language. I mean, somebody has taken this video. This is about rainwater harvesting. This was water table was very high. Every time my site was getting flooded, so I had rainwater harvesting ponds. The roof water is actually getting into that. Everything that you see in this particular locality, the mud concrete that's being used for the road development, this is the shape of the building that is quite unfamiliar to you. The roof is all mud walls. Ordinary mud bricks that I made from the site. All the roofs you can see are mud walls, and all the local materials, showcasing, flaunting local materials like bamboo, mud, the texture. The beauty of mud is that the texture, the color, you can see the colors inside. I mean, this is the mud wall that comes out. And talk about sustainability between. That particular RCC roof that you saw actually have bamboo splits as its reinforcement. And these are some of this thing. They actually took out some tiles from a local school. They threw it on the road. I took it and mainstreamed it as one of the basic. This wood, you can see the splits. They're all wasted wood lying on the road. I mainstreamed it, made it to the main this thing. The paint that you see is cashew nut oil. It's a waste material that you get in plenty. These are actually sections of the props that I used for doing the shutters. After the shuttering was over, I cut it into pieces, made it to architectural expression, and the rest of it you can see courtyard things coming in, natural stones, bamboo, and the rest of it. When you talk about this thing, there is always a shadow between the words and the deeds. If that shadow can be bridged, if you really mean what you really preach, then I think it will be beautiful for us. Thank you very much for your kind attention.